question period in the Alberta Legislature. My name is David Carter, Speaker of the House. The Speaker has an interesting job because any person who occupies the chair is something like a traffic controller, having to deal with all the notes and the procedures that occur in the House. I cannot recognize an individual MLA by the name of John Jones, but rather I must say their constituency of, for example, Cypress Redcliffe. You'll notice after prayers have been said that I have to point at various members of the House, and that's to let them know that I've seen them wave their hands that they want to be part of question period on this day. After the House question period on this day, the Lieutenant Governor will attend upon the Assembly to give royal assent to 4 important money bills. Later today, the House will adjourn until next Wednesday.
Let us pray. O Lord, grant us a daily awareness of the precious gift of life which you have given us. As members of this legislative assembly, we dedicate our lives anew to the service of our province and our country. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to present the report of the Special Committee to select the members of the select standing committees of this legislature. I have 5 copies.
Notices of motions. Introduction of bills.
Member for Edmonton Highlands.
Mr. Speaker, I beg leave to introduce Bill number 224, Religious and Ethnic Holidays Act. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of this bill in a multicultural province like Alberta is to amend the Employment Standards Act to allow any employee on 1 month's notice to be entitled to take as a holiday any day of special either ethnocultural or religious significance to that employee, on the understanding that it would be taken either without pay or the time would be made up at the discretion of the employer.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands has moved first reading of Bill 224, Religious and Ethnic Holidays Act, for first reading. Those in favour, please say aye. Opposed, please say no. Carried.
Bill number 224, Religious and Ethnic Holidays Act, introduced by the Honourable Member Ms. Barrett, is now read a first time. Tabling returns and reports.
Minister of Economic Development and Trade.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the annual report of the Alberta Motion Picture Development Corporation for the year ended March 31st, 1987. Copies will be made available to all members of the Assembly.
Member for Dunvegan.
Mr. Speaker, I would like to present the annual report of the Water Resources Commission for the year ending March 31st, 1987.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Vermilion Viking.
Mr. Speaker, it's my pleasure today to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Assembly 2 groups of individuals from my constituency who represent the greatest resource we have in the province of Alberta, our youth. The first group is grades 7, 8, and 9 from the Lougheed School. It's situated in the southern part of the constituency. There are 43 in this group. They're seated in the public gallery, accompanied by their teachers Joan Drager, Larry Narot, Helen Stedman, and Muriel Fankhandel, parents Sheila Tanton, Glenn Kelly, and Alan Ness. And I would ask that they rise and receive the cordial welcome of this House. As we move down Highway 13, about 8 miles, we come to Sedgwick Central High School. And today we have 2 grade 10 groups, 37 in total, that are participating in the field testing of the new Social Studies 10 curriculum. The unit they're studying at the present time is Canadian citizenship. They are accompanied by their teacher, Greg Martin, and a parent, Darlene Kowalski. And I would ask them in the public and members' galleries to stand and receive the warm welcome of the Assembly also.
Minister of Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to introduce to you and to members of the Assembly a visitor to the Legislative Assembly who comes from the Three Hills constituency. He is seated in the members' gallery, and I might add, Mr. Speaker, an example of a young, energetic, community-minded individual. I'd like Harry Salm, the administrator of the Village of Air Canada, to stand, please.
Member for Red Deer South.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's a pleasure for me to introduce to you and through you to the members of the Legislative Assembly 31 enthusiastic, bright, and courteous grade 6 students from the Piper Creek School in Red Deer South. They are accompanied by their teachers, Mr. Larry Pym and Mr. Gordon Brownlee, and by 2 parents, Marilyn Ripka and Sharon Gall. I should say, Mr. Speaker, that when Mr. Pym is not busy teaching students, he's busy serving the citizens of Red Deer as a senior member of Red Deer City Council, a person that I had the pleasure of serving with and I know is serving the citizens well. I would ask that they would rise in the members' gallery and receive the warm reception of this Assembly.
Member for Calgary-McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I would like to introduce a number of people from across the province, from many constituencies, who have traveled to Edmonton today to attend a commission meeting for the Alcohol and Drug Abuse Commission. These people are dedicated in their efforts to assist Albertans with their problems of alcohol and drug abuse, and also 3 of the people who look after the organization. I would ask them to stand, and once they're all standing, if the Assembly would give them a cordial welcome. There are Walt Bodie, Joe Lipka, Dr. and Mrs. Tom Melling, Stan Monarski, Lee Reiki, Leona Shandrock, Glenn Blumenthal, Brian Kearns, and Terry Lind. Give them a kind welcome.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to whoever's in charge over there, I take it's Deputy Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Getty government has never increased the minimum wage. In fact, you have to go back to May the 1st, 1981, to find any compassion or understanding for the working poor. My question to the Deputy Premier, is the Deputy Premier not ashamed that the minimum wage in this country or in this province is the lowest in the country and has been for some time?
Mr. Speaker, I think it's been indicated on other occasions that that matter will soon be taken under consideration by the government.
Mr. Speaker, it's been taken under consideration since 1981. It's 1988, Mr. Speaker. My question is, Alberta's minimum wage is $3.80. No one else has a minimum wage below $4. Nobody else in the country. Has the minister considered how a working person could live on $3.80 an hour?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I indicated to the Honourable Leader that that matter will soon be taken under consideration. including all the complex issues that are attached with a minimum wage, particularly in an economy like Alberta's.
Mr. Speaker, we've raised this question in almost every session, and they're always considering it.
Yeah.
The working poor, Mr. Speaker, want some answers. They want some money rather than considering it. Now, my question is that the Premier apparently was in Calgary yesterday at a food bank, and he said that he was bothered that working poor were using the food bank, but he said, but as long as there are food banks like this, it isn't so bad. Maybe he would like to go to the food bank and line up. And my question is to the Deputy Premier, when are you going to quit stalling around? Right. Tell us today when we can look forward to a raise in the minimum wage in this province.
Mr. Premier, Mr. Speaker, I can assure the Honourable Leader that this government has a well-thought-out, organised plan of action, and that the response to the concerns raised by the Honourable Leader will be addressed on our schedule.
Mr. Speaker, that is not good enough. Albertans are embarrassed. In this rich province, we have the lowest in the country, behind Newfoundland, everywhere else. And rather than saying it's on this government's schedule, will the Deputy Premier tell us today what that schedule entails and when we can look forward to an increase in the minimum wage? This month, next month, when? Next year, after the election, or when?
Yeah, right.
Well, I believe the short answer to that question is no, but Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to mention that Alberta's average wage is the second highest in Canada. Our economy is in the process of making a strong comeback, and we have indicated that one of the things to consider in this period of recovery is that existing minimum wage level. And
Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary question.
Supplementary to the Deputy Premier, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure, who prides himself on his logic. Since there is no evidence to show that jobs are decreased when the minimum wage goes up, why doesn't this government go ahead now and raise the minimum wage?
Mr. Speaker, I think I dealt with that question in my earlier comments to the Leader.
Member for Dunvegan.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask the Deputy Premier if he believes there'd be any effect on the unemployment rate if we raise the minimum wage.
Good question. Well, Mr. Speaker, I indicated in earlier replies that that is one of the complex issues that has to be considered. Also, the classes of people who are making that minimum wage, where they are working, whether it's full or part-time employment, it is a complex issue, and this government will be addressing that issue shortly.
Second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
Complex for this government. For my second, I'd like to designate my question to the member from Edmonton Glengarry, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the Minister of the Environment, or in this case, potentially the Minister in charge of Disaster Services, in December of 1986, Hardy and Associates evaluated the Old Man Dam site in relation to 1980's preliminary engineering studies and concluded that there was, and I quote, undue haste to rush into construction before many of the design studies are complete. Many people believe that this is a design-on-the-run project where safety plays second fiddle to construction and political deadlines. Will the minister allay those fears by tabling in the legislature all of the design studies and engineering studies, especially the final design documents for this dam?
Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank the member from Edmonton Glengarry for raising that point today. What I would like to table in the Legislative Assembly today, Mr. Speaker, is a copy of a letter that I sent on May 6, 1987, a letter without prejudice, to the Chief and the Council of the Piegan Nation, which responds and refers to a report that was commissioned by the Piegan Nation, and a report that I received on February 19, 1987. All members will recall that the Piegan Nation approached the government and asked for some assistance in undertaking a wide-ranging evaluations of reports, and we, the government of Alberta, provided the Piegan Nation some $750,000 and asked them to go out and hire whatever consultants they wanted to hire with respect to as many subject areas that they would want to take a look at with respect to the Old Man River Dam. They did that and provided to me in February of 1987 some 13 reports that I looked at, that I read, that I evaluated, and I responded to them in writing with respect to that matter, including the dam report. And I also met with the Piegan Nation, Mr. Speaker, in 1987. And I would also like to point out that the authors of the report basically indicate that they were raising a number of questions, and I understand that they've now publicly commented in the last 2 days that all of their concerns that they raised at that time have now been dealt with by Alberta Environment.
Thank you. The public hasn't seen any of that, and there are some serious concerns raised there, including increased danger from earthquakes. I would ask the minister when he will table in this legislature, all of the design documents so that the people of Alberta can see them and decide how accurate his answers are?
Mr. Speaker, we have two groups of people that advise the Government of Alberta with respect to dam safety. One is an international panel of experts from around the world who work hand in hand not only with Alberta Environment, which has its independent group that looks at the construction of this particular project. I should point it out as well, Mr. Speaker, that the actual designing and construction of the Old Man River Dam project is done by a consortium of engineering groups in the province of Alberta, independent of the government. It's headed up by UMA Engineering, and the engineering profession in the province of Alberta might be contacted with respect to their analysis and their evaluation of the performance of this private sector engineering firm, this consortium headed by UMA Engineering, and it certainly is an option and an opportunity for the New Democratic Party to do that. I would also like to point out, Mr. Speaker, to not only the New Democratic Party but all of the people of Alberta, that Alberta Environment has a library located in the Oxford Bridge building here in downtown Edmonton, and also
Thank you. Supplementary.
And getting information out of it is like getting into Fort Knox. I would ask the minister if all of the solutions to all of the problems raised in that paper have increased the cost at all, or if he's found some way to do it for free, and if it's increased it, where are the recalculated cost-benefit analyses?
Mr. Speaker, the construction project known as the Old Man River Dam was announced in 1986. It will come in at $349.6 million in 1986 dollars, plus the $3.7 million in terms of local road work that we've already agreed to. The report in question that has now been discounted by the very authors of the report publicly, by public statement, statements already carried in the media, clearly show to us that there is no cost addition as a result of the information provided to us. I have a very difficult time understanding and appreciating, Mr. Speaker, how a little project known as the Old Man River Dam, located in the extreme southwestern part of the province of Alberta, could hardly lead to an earthquake scare in the province of Alberta.
Thank you. I could explain to him, except I'm sure that would stretch your indulgence. In that case, I would direct a question to the Deputy Premier, that being that he and the government as a whole show a little more far-sightedness than the Minister of the Environment by subjecting the entire planning process for this dam, including all engineering studies and the final engineering documents, to independent review by independent engineers.
Mr. Speaker, I've been waiting for that question for years. You know, when I became Minister of Environment for the province of Alberta in 1975, one of the things I inherited from my predecessor, Bill Yurko, who's been called the best Minister of Environment this province ever had, was a stack of studies on the Old Man River that high. And in the intervening 14 years that this government has rushed into building that dam, that thing has been studied to death.
Westlock Sturgeon with a supplementary question.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker, the shock of being recognized so quickly took like bowl me over. This is back to the Minister of Environment without commenting on the fact that the old volcano has a little bit of fire left in there. Could I go back to the Minister of Environment? If I may go back to the Minister of Environment, in view of the fact that the Environment Council of Alberta, the ECA, has had its budget cut from $1.2 million to only $800,000 in the last couple of years, and it's this type of council that we need to examine things like the Hardy Report and others, because this government is so loath to let any questioning go on. Would he not now reconsider the funding of the ECA, because it might have to fold up and move it back from $800,000 to back to $1.2 million?
Well, indirectly, Mr. Speaker, I think a point of clarification here. The report in question is not a report of the Government of Alberta. It is not a report of Alberta Environment. It is not a report of the Environment Council of Alberta. It is a report commissioned by the Piegan Nation. The Piegan Nation owns the report, can make the report public, can provide it to anybody to have it evaluated. And I think it's very important, Mr. Speaker, that everyone understand that it can be evaluated by everyone, including the Environment Council of Alberta. And there's no requirement for additional funds to evaluate a report. I evaluated the report. It didn't cost me any money to do it. I had experts come in and give me their views on it. They've provided it. And I want to repeat again, Mr. Speaker, the Liberal Party has nearly $400,000 for research. The NDP caucus has nearly $1 million a year for research. They can evaluate the report.
Main question, Leader of the Liberal Party.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is to both continuation of yesterday, Mr. Speaker, to both the Minister of Labour and the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker. In view of the fact that we have one fiasco after another as far as our youth are concerned, whether it's the Bosco Ranch or children going hungry in our schools, or no funding for the Caritas home in Vegreville, for the Caritas home for unwed mothers, and finally we now have this teachers' strike, Mr. Speaker. And there's one thread that runs through all of this, Mr. Speaker, a very much a callousness by this provincial government as far as youth is concerned, as far as the problems of youth are concerned. I would like, the first question is to the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker. In view of some confusion that she exhibited yesterday in the case of whether or not the monies that are, how much of the monies are being withheld in the view of the strike in Northeast Alberta, has she now had a chance to find out accurately how much monies are still being withheld from the school boards of Northeast Alberta where the strike is taking place? Has she an exact figure of the dollar amount?
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps we could direct the confusion to the other side of the House, not to here. If he'd asked the question yesterday, I'd have been ready to give him the answer. Under Section 137.13 of the School Act, there is an ability to withhold the grants payable to a school board, and it would be reduced in order to prevent any financial benefit flowing to that school board during the time of a strike or lockout. If the honourable member is suggesting that boards should benefit financially from a strike, then perhaps he can put the matter on the order paper and we can have a good discussion.
Mr. Speaker, she is a better skater than Madam Manley. The question was how much money had they held back, not whether or not they were holding it back. I already informed her of that yesterday, Mr. Speaker. The question then, since these taxes were collected, to the Minister, since these taxes were collected from the people of Alberta, from the people in that area, to pay for schools, what right has this government to sit on that money and refuse to pass it through the boards so they indeed could make a settlement?
Oh, Mr. Speaker, you're getting very close to the heart of the matter here, and if the honourable member would like to suggest that the right to strike be taken away from teachers in this province, he can put that on the order paper too. In terms of withholding dollars from school boards, as I've already indicated, that is a matter that is dealt with in the current School Act, Section 137.13, if you'd care to look it up. Since the strike is still occurring, I can tell him that for the 7 school boards involved in the strike, the approximate reduction of their grant per day, per school day of the strike is about $40,000 per day.
Mr. Speaker, $40,000 per day. Obviously, the minister is just reading a memorized statement given to her by one of her leprechauns earlier in the day. Let me switch over to the Minister of Labour, who may be able to answer some questions rather than read off a prepared statement by one of his minions. Could I ask the Minister of Labour? The natives are restless. You rattle a cage and the whole works wakes up, Mr. Speaker.
Let's rattle the cage with a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Labour, he has been quoted as saying that he had some ideas on how to settle this strike, but he was withholding them. I would like to know, Mr. Speaker, what those ideas are. I think the House, would he share with the House what ideas that he says he had and how to settle the strike? Would he share that with us?
Mr. Speaker, I don't read statements like the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party reads his questions. Perhaps that's why they're usually clearer. The answers are usually clearer than the questions, I think. The situation is that this is a dispute between two entities. I have some ideas. Some of them have been implemented. It's because of that that we now have a situation where they are so close. The parties themselves seem to be unable to get to that stage themselves. But the parties themselves should be able to conclude the process. I said yesterday that we would continue the intensive efforts to try and get the parties back to the bargaining table to complete the negotiations and get an agreement, and those efforts are indeed continuing today.
Final supplementary.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker. Back to the Minister of Education then. Since the Minister of Labour has run out of gas or whatever it is, could Minister of Education now admit it's due to her strangulation policy of the school boards, due to the fact that she's not funding education, due to the fact that this government moves it way down the priority list, in spite of the sanctimonious singing they do about it being number one? That is why our school boards do not have the money to pay our teachers a decent living wage.
Well, Mr. Speaker, perhaps the Leader of the Liberal Party would have a case if there had been no teacher settlements since the grant announcements had been announced in this province on January the 8th. In fact, there have. In fact, there was a settlement within the actual area where the strike is occurring now. So the priority of this government on education is without dispute. I think we discussed yesterday, and certainly I welcome the opportunity to repeat the fact that the major grant programs of all of them across the government, we took the very progressive, the very much leadership step this year in saying, in fact, basic education is the most important function we perform as a government, and therefore awarded it with the highest increase of any of the major grant programs.
Member for Vermilion Viking, followed by the member for Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Supplemental to the Minister of Labour, could the Minister explain why in the province of Alberta the boards cannot hire replacement teachers in this situation, such as other labour disputes?
It has to do more with the internal organisation of the Alberta Teachers Association. Teaching in this province has to be done in the public system and in the separate system by certificated teachers who have to join the Alberta Teachers Association, and within the Alberta Teachers Association they do not allow teachers to take such replacement work.
Mr. Speaker, since it is obvious zone bargaining is not working in Alberta, when will the Minister of Labour institute province-wide bargaining so that the province can finally assume responsibility for settling dispute in the teachers' profession?
Mr. Speaker, zone bargaining has worked very well in the past in this province. It is true that the Alberta Teachers Association may not like it, but on the other hand, when the Alberta Teachers Association insist upon Barnett House staff signing every agreement rather than the locals of the ATA, then I think it is quite reasonable that in response to that type of behaviour on one side, that the school board should be able to form a formal employers' organisation on the other, so that the clout on the two sides is more equalised than it would be otherwise. And province-wide bargaining is not always successful, as we recently saw in the dispute between the Alberta Hospital Association representing the hospitals and the United Nurses of Alberta.
Member for Little Bow.
Question to the Minister of Labour. The Minister has indicated that he is putting forward the proposal that at a point in time he would order the teachers back to work. Could the minister indicate how long that process will take and possibly when the starting point will be?
No, Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to put any deadline on these negotiations. The parties are as close as they can be without finally agreeing. And to introduce the concept of back-to-work legislation, which involves binding arbitration, when the difference between the parties is about 0.5% on the cost over a 32-month period, is somewhat difficult to justify, certainly at this time.
Member for Little Bow, followed by Cypress Redcliffe, Edmonton Avonmore, Vegreville, Calgary Buffalo, Stony Plain, Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, my question is to the Minister of Environment. The budget is now down and the people of Little Bow are waiting for that big announcement about the dam on the Little Bow River. And I was wondering if the Minister could indicate the status of that today and when we'll start.
Waiting for Condit and
I take it, Mr. Speaker, that the petition made by the Leader of the Representative Party is for another dam in the province of Alberta. Dam Mosquito Creek and Little Bow. That would include some water diversion, perhaps from Mosquito Creek to Clear Lake, a lake, Mr. Speaker, that is on the map of Alberta but has no water in it, a lake that I had an opportunity to go and visit last fall. I think the intent, Mr. Speaker, would be to deal with this matter during the estimates. The Minister of the Environment and all members know, Mr. Speaker, that one can be designated and could have been designated for today, so we might have talked about it later today. But I suspect we'll be dealing with it during 1988, to be very specific in terms of the question from the Leader of the Representative Party.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary question to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate the details of dealing with the dam in this year? Will that mean monies for the planning stage, or would that mean monies as well for possible start of construction?
I think, Mr. Speaker, that we would want to deal with this matter in much of the way in which I dealt with it several days ago in responding to a similar question to the Leader of the Representative Party, that we would want to, number one, ensure planning. Number two, we would want to deal with the need to move some water to Clear Lake, a recreation lake in that part of Alberta that has no water in it. And thirdly, then, we would want to be in a position to commit to a construction program. And the timing, really, in terms of the three events would be, number one, conclude all of the planning that's required with respect to this project. Secondly, to initiate the minor movement of water to Clear Lake. And thirdly, then, to get to the next stage, and that would be working towards the actual construction.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary to the Minister. Could the Minister indicate the dollars that have been allotted for this project in the current budget that is before us?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is part of the final definitive difficulty that we have in terms of concluding the planning for this. Part of it has to do with land and land in the area that might be required. There is a Hutterite colony that's very close to the river in question, and the final determination of what the reservoir fill would be would then lead us to making a decision as to actually how much land would be required, and then being in a position to give it a definitive statement with respect to the cost. It's my desire, Mr. Speaker, that when such an announcement is made with respect to this water management project, that the figure that we would announce, we would have great knowledge in terms that it would be the definitive figure, and I think it would be premature at this point in time to give a dollar statement, because it would be my intent that when we do announce the actual figure, that would be the figure that we would want to see the whole project completed at, so that there wouldn't be any misunderstanding. As an example, when the original announcement was made with the Old Man River Dam, although it was made very clear that it was a temporary figure.
Thank you, Honourable Minister. Final supplementary. That's the end of the flow on that river system. Okay. Could we recognize then, please, the member for Cypress Redcliffe, followed by Edmonton Avonmore?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question, the first part of my question is to the Minister of Agriculture. I'd like to ask the Minister of Agriculture if he has any plans or has formed any committees to discuss and develop a strategy to deal with the drought that we may have from one end of this province to the other this summer.
Mr. Speaker, yes, we have put together a group within our department, and we are working in conjunction with the Minister of Environment as it relates to a serious problem that could arise within the province. What we also have done is we put into place a number of groups to conduct an inventory study as to feed supplies throughout the province, and there are sufficient quantities of feed at this time. Plus, we were encouraged by the indication in the speech from the throne, which was underscored in the budget, whereby the water program under the Minister of Transportation and Utilities is going to be continued. There are a number of programs in place. In the event that we need to take special measures, we will examine them at that time. But I would hope, and I guess we all would hope, that we would see a repeat of some of the areas that did receive sufficient snowfalls between March 26th and 28th. The weather can change so quickly that we are going to continue to monitor it, but we're not going to panic.
Mr. Speaker, again to the Minister, has the Minister examined any possible changes to the transportation of water by the temporary aluminum pipes, and not only tied farmsteads into that and farmers into that, but small towns and villages throughout this province that, even with the snowfall that was had over the weekend, won't have sufficient runoff?
Mr. Speaker, that is something that we would be open to examining. As the honourable member is aware, it would involve a number of departments, including the Ministry of Transportation and Utilities and the Environmental Department, and I'm sure that the Minister of Environment would like to supplement it.
Supplementary to the Minister of Environment, I wonder if the Minister of Environment has examined the possibilities of reinstituting, as was in the last time we had a drought throughout the province, the water well drilling program for domestic water wells throughout this province.
Mr. Speaker, that matter is currently under review.
Final supplementary, Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Transportation. And it may be a strange question tacked on to the end of a question on drought, but with certain parts of this province having some snowfall and it piling up rather than spreading out, I wonder if the Minister of Transportation has been approached by councils and is in a position to indicate if he can supply additional funding to them for the removal of snow on their streets from this storm of the last 2 days.
No, I...
Vegreville, followed by Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of the Environment, I've been contacted by a number of producers in northeastern Alberta whose dugouts are dry, and they're wondering if there are any legal implications involved if they're to try and pump water from lakes and rivers adjacent to their property to fill these dugouts.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there's a process that all people who want to divert water in this province must follow, and that includes all individuals, as it includes, of course, Alberta Environment and agencies of the Government of Alberta, and we're very, very happy to provide information to the member from Vegreville in terms of the process that should be followed.
Here's Westlock Sturgeon, supplementary.
To supplement back to the Minister of Agriculture, in view of the fact, Mr. Speaker, that the weather modification program to suppress hail was cancelled because it was causing too much rain, would they now rethink the process and reinstitute the weather modification program, because we indeed do need the rain?
Mr. Speaker, as the honourable member is aware, what we have done is we've taken a number of steps, and I'm not about to give any justification to his very misleading statement, but the Associate Minister just recently announced the extension of our forage insurance to cover the entire province. We have insurance in place so that in the event that a disaster does take place, we have measures that we can react with. In addition to that, I think it would be very valuable if the Associate Minister responded as it relates directly to weather modification, as that did fall under her.
Not the MLA.
Mr. Speaker, I'd be pleased to respond to the member's question. There certainly is no unanimous agreement among farmers nor researchers in the province of Alberta about the effect of water or weather modification, nor of the actual results of that modification. And at this point in time, our budget is set, and we do not have any plans to reintroduce the weather modification program in 1988.
Edmonton Avonmore, followed by Vegreville, Calgary, Buffalo, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister responsible for women's issues, the Alberta Advisory Council on Women's Issues has expressed concern, as we heard earlier today, that about the fact that the level of the minimum wage is the lowest in Canada, and stated further that the service industry, which employs most women, is characterized by minimum wage jobs and part-time jobs. These factors can be linked to the fact that 60% of low-income persons between the ages of 16 and 64 are women, and further that 60% of female single-parent families live below the poverty line. The Minister has said that she is The Minister has said she is concerned an increase in the minimum wage will have a negative impact on small business. Does she really believe that higher minimum wages in other provinces have had a negative impact on small business?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the question that was asked of the other ministers earlier today indicates that there are many complexities, and I'm reminded at our policy conference last fall, a woman from Red Deer, a successful small businesswoman, got up and explained to us that she herself would not want to see the minimum wage increased because the minimum wage represented often enough an entry-level wage for those who are entering the workforce on sometimes a temporary basis, who are then taken on a permanent basis at a higher wage. There are many complexities. I would say, though, Mr. Speaker, that the honourable member is hitting on a matter that we are all very concerned about, and that is the poverty that many women experience, particularly those who are single parents. And we in this government, of course, wish to do everything we can to help them out of that rather difficult situation.
Their shelter allowance.
Mr. Speaker, the position of poor women has not changed. The Advisory Council also recommended an extensive and comprehensive public study on pay equity. The Minister said that she was not ready for a quick fix remedy. What concrete measures is the Minister prepared to advocate to her Cabinet colleagues to eliminate the wage gap?
Well, Mr. Speaker, interestingly enough, I was reading earlier an article by Maureen Sabia, who is a feminist in Ontario, who is pointing out that, in fact, pay equity is a quick-fix solution that does not address the problems that have been identified by the honourable member. The lower wages taken on average of women can be attributed to several factors, as it was pointed out by Judge Abella in her report some years ago. There are many factors involved, one of them being, for example, preparation for career choices. And I'm pleased to say that this government, led by the Women's Secretariat and supported by Career Development and Employment and by Education, has instituted a program mentioned in the throne speech called Stepping Stones, which we would hope will increase the options available to their knowledge to both young men and young women in our junior high schools.
Mr. Speaker, differences in women's employment history and such factors account for only 1/3 of the difference of the pay inequity. And in fact, women with university degrees earn only 69% of men with the same education. How can the Minister not justify not taking action towards implementing equal pay for work of equal value? Can't just shove it off as factors specific to women.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the Ontario Green Paper on Pay Equity, which was published in 1983, indicated that only 5% of the 38% differential in Ontario was attributable to actual wage discrimination. There are many other variables, one of which being that many women who enter the workforce choose then to have a family, and many of them choose to stay home and nurture the children, at least in their early years. There are other factors such as the commitment to the the women often do not work the long hours. Many women are not prepared to put up with the health difficulties that are sometimes required when you're on a search for excellence or a fast-track program. And there are other factors as well, which I will not outline in greater detail at the moment. But the point I wanted to reiterate is this. The Ontario government itself, in 1983, identified that only 5% of the 38% differential is attributable to wage discrimination.
Well, Mr. Speaker, in Australia, the pay differential was reduced by 15% after pay equity was introduced. To the Deputy Premier, has this government done any research to calculate the millions of dollars that could be saved by increasing the minimum wage and introducing pay equity, thereby reducing the need for personal income support programs, health and child care subsidy, housing support programs, social
Thank you, Honourable Member. That's more than sufficient for a supplementary question. Deputy Premier.
Well, I appreciate the concerns that the honourable member has put out, but I think even she would agree that that's almost explaining how the world revolves. There's so many aspects and factors that have been alluded to in her question that that's an analysis of the entire economy, and of course that's what any government or any legislature does on an ongoing basis.
Red Deer North, followed by Edmonton Gold Bar.
To the Minister, Mr. Speaker, can she indicate to us in her studies, taking into consideration Alberta's positive tax regime, which taxes at a lower rate than anywhere else in the country, the fact that Albertans have the highest disposable income after taxes, has she taken that into consideration as she looks at the minimum wage question?
Let's have some replacement back.
Well, Mr. Speaker, there is no question that we in Alberta enjoy one of the most favorable tax regimes, in our budget that we just introduced the other day is one of the best that anyone in this country has brought down within the last 10 years, and we're all very proud of that. In the meantime, Mr. Speaker, there is no question, and I have the same goal, I think, as the honourable member opposite has, and that is to forward the position of women in Alberta, which will benefit thereby all men and women in Alberta, and it's certainly something that our Premier has undertaken to do in his commitments at the First Ministers' conferences. We will all work towards economic equality for women in Alberta.
Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, to the supplementary to the Minister, will the Minister support benefits, health care and so on to part-time workers, a serious problem that is critical to women in the labour force? They're forced into jobs that end up being three-month wonders. Will you support benefits?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't wish to give the impression that I would agree with all of the implications that are being put by the member opposite on that particular question. Part-time work is becoming an increasing phenomenon. There is no question. Many women are in those part-time jobs. Often it is a matter of choice, a lifestyle choice, which accommodates both the nurturing of children at home and the career.
With due respect, Honourable Minister, perhaps take your seat until such time as the rest of us could hear what's being said. Honourable Minister.
As to benefits for part-time workers, it's a larger question, I think, than is being suggested. It is one of those sorts of things that everyone is studying at the moment, but there are enormous implications for introducing that as well in our economic picture. It's something that, however, I, for one, have an eye upon.
Member for Vegreville, followed by Calgary-Buffalo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister of Federal and Intergovernmental Affairs. The Mulroney Conservatives have told the Canada Post Corporation that they must balance their budget by late 1988. And in response, Canada Post developed a business plan that calls for closing up to 1,700 rural post offices and privatizing 3,500 other rural post offices. And I'm wondering if the Minister has made any representation to the Federal Minister in charge of Canada Post about these plans which threaten many of our small rural communities in Alberta?
No, Mr. Speaker, that is not part of the responsibility that I hold in this government. Federal government is solely responsible for the post office. That's in the Constitution of Canada. I would refer the honourable member to Section 91 of the Constitution Act.
Well, for the minister to suggest that this government has not been prepared to intervene in the past and recommended the federal government changes about things which affect and hurt Albertans is ludicrous.
That's right. Tell us.
Perhaps a supplementary question?
Is the minister then saying that he's not concerned about plans this federal government's making to close up to 180 post offices in rural Alberta and that he's not going to do anything about it?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not saying that I'm not concerned about postal services in Alberta, and for the honourable member for Vegreville to suggest that is ludicrous. Of course, though, it is the responsibility of this government to carry out certain responsibilities given to it under the Constitution Act. For us to assume the responsibility of dealing with postal services is something that I do feel should best remain where it belongs. I've often said if the federal government could deliver the mail properly to Canadians, including Albertans, they could then perhaps give us some advice as to how to carry out our constitutional responsibilities.
Great. In fairness, it's difficult for Conservatives to run anything properly, Mr. Is the minister then saying, Mr. Speaker, that this government is prepared to sit back and let the federal government do whatever it wants to Alberta as long as it's in their so-called constitutional rights to do so?
Whoa. Mr. Speaker, the honourable member for Vegreville can make representations to his member of Parliament, and I think that he should be prepared to do that.
Listen to him.
And he is free to do that, as are all Albertans. And therefore, I would suggest that I am not about to undertake postal services issues on behalf of this government. It's not our responsibility to carry out those. Well, the honourable leader of the opposition constantly. Honourable leader of the opposition.
With due respect, Attorney General. Is there a further supplementary question on this issue, Vegreville?
Mr. Speaker, if this government isn't concerned, the opposition is.
Question, Vegreville. Order, please. Chair recognizes the member for Calgary-Buffalo with the main question.
Thank you. This is to the Minister of Education. To the Minister of Education, Mr. Speaker, this government has consistently been oblivious to the needs and concerns of lower-income Albertans as opposed to the Pocklingtons. Last year, I asked the Minister about increased user fees in our schools, which make it difficult for lower-income children to access programs. I also asked about hunger in our schools. It's becoming increasingly clear that, in addition, schools in lower-income areas with many single-parent families and large immigrant families are in need of greater funding in order to maintain even the same quality of education in schools as in wealthier areas. Now, the Minister stated, the question is, the Minister stated on April 28th and 29th she would look into the issue of user fees. Can she now give us a complete report on this matter since almost a whole year has passed?
Time for question period has expired. Might we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, I can't just deal with the 1 out of 6 questions that are in the question, but with respect to user fees, I think the reintroduction of the School Act in the spring session will be a good opportunity to discuss the pros and cons of having user fees in our school system as a portion of an income which a school board can derive. Suffice it to say that I would think, and certainly the comments I've had from parents across this province with respect to their students using textbooks, would far prefer to pay a user fee in order to rent those texts as opposed to have to go out and purchase the books outright. So the issue is not quite as black and white as the honourable member would like to define.
Well, that reflects an appalling simplification of a very, very difficult issue, Mr. Speaker. And I'm wondering whether what the minister is doing about hunger in our schools and to review the options for addressing this heart-wrenching problem. No more studies. The difficulty is well known.
Well, Mr. Speaker, how the honourable member gets from user fees to hunger is questionable, but nonetheless, obviously, the problem of young children going to school hungry is a problem which all society must face. And one of the reasons why we have moved to block funding, for example, is to recognize that different jurisdictions of school boards across the province are dealing with different sets of problems and circumstances, one of which may be the problem of addressing hunger in the schools. I am quite pleased, frankly, with the work done by the Calgary boards in looking at the problem within their city. As well, I think it would be wrong for me to not highlight the point of the
Honourable Minister, could we save some for some more supplementary?
Well, the minister is quite ready to interfere when it's a matter of the ward system or sales of school buildings, yet it's hands-off when it's fairness between rich and poor children. So I'd like to know what the minister is doing to address the funding being experienced by schools in lower income areas. This is a problem which has been raised by many of these schools and has been...
Honourable member, the question has been asked. We're into supplementaries. Time period has been expended, courtesy of the House. Honourable Minister to the question.
Mr. Speaker, I think an important point to make is one that was recognized in our budget on last Thursday night when we increased the allowance for social assistance with respect to food purchases, because I think, in fact, and the Minister of Social Services may wish to supplement my answer, that will, in fact, assist the difficult problems faced by some families in our cities and across our province.
How many kids can you feed?
Mr. Speaker, the Community Schools program has a great deal of promise for helping to address many of these problems which I've raised, but its funding was cut last year. And will the minister tell this House, since she isn't building on the potential of this wonderful program, what other strategies she has for helping lower-income children receive a quality education?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member is quite correct in pointing to the community school program, and there is close to $3 million in the Department of Education budget, which will be discussed during my estimates. But certainly how those $3 million are allocated amongst the schools is a question that I think we should address as a legislature, as community school associations across the province, something which I have asked them to do in order that some of those schools which are operating without a cent of provincial government support as full-fledged community schools might address a better way to apportion those funds.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, given that there's nothing more unfair than the equal treatment of unequals, what plans does the minister have to upgrade the older schools in the lower income areas of our cities?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the upgrading of local schools and the restoration and the modernization and the building program totaling a $6 billion capital investment in this province is something that I am certainly proud of and our government is proud of in terms of supporting education. As the honourable member is well aware, the issue of better meeting the equity needs amongst school boards is an issue that I put out a paper on in the fall, and perhaps the honourable member would like to address some of those options when the School Act is reintroduced this spring.
Supplementary, Calgary McCall.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister of Education, would the minister consider asking the boards of education in the province to examine funding on an individual school needs rather than by global budgeting, considering the concerns raised in those areas with lower income families and considerable ESL students?
Mr. Speaker, the manner in which school boards designate the dollars provided to them by the province is an issue which local school boards have as their own responsibility. We have examples of both the global budgeting and individual budgeting taking place in this province. I think, in fact, it would be an improper move to now direct boards how they suspend those dollars rather than the block funding concept which we have moved to.
Supplementary information in some interesting manner from social services.
I wanted to address the questions earlier on that dealt with the question of children coming to school hungry, and I think that the honourable member for Calgary-Buffalo could certainly assist many parents in that regard if he'd give consideration to also challenging parents to manage better. Mr. Speaker, I wanted to give over to the Assembly the type of information that comes to my desk. There are many, many parents out there who manage very well on the amount that is allowed under social allowance. And they are saying to me as minister, why don't I do something about the parents who are sending their kids to school hungry because the money has been spent on something else? And I might add, Mr. Speaker, that that follows as well with higher income families. So I think it behooves all members of the Assembly to speak to parents about their responsibility as well. Because, Mr. Speaker, community organizations have offered programs.
Order, please, Honourable. Order, please, Honourable Minister. Time for question period has expired. The chair recognizes the member for Little Bow with respect to a point of order.
Mr. Speaker, I rise on a point of order that follows out of the discussion of agricultural estimates last night. And at the conclusion of estimates, the Minister of Agriculture quoted page 1623 of the November 13th, 1981 Hansard, of which I was the author of those comments. And the Minister of Agriculture quoted part of my remarks, but not all of my remarks, and on that basis did not leave the correct interpretation of what I said at that time. The Minister, and I quote the remarks last night that were made in part, I'm directly involved in, and this is my statement as of November the 13th, 1981, and I'm saying in remarks under the estimates of the Heritage Savings Trust Fund, at which time we're talking about the process by which people are able to access the various programs. And I have said this and have been quoted by the Minister of Agriculture. I'm directly involved in filling out many applications of young farmers who want to apply for money from the Alberta Agricultural Development Corporation. And then leaving out a space, the Minister goes on to say, quote me in saying, it's many hours of work, many hours of frustration, many phone calls, many arms twisted. And the Minister stopped there by the inference that I was twisting the arms of the public servants to give loans to my young farmers. Mr. Speaker, if we clearly read in Hansard of that day, that is not what I was talking about. What I was talking about was the process through which people have to work in the bureaucratic system. And that we were concerned at that time, and I'm supported by my colleague of that day, Mr. Clark, who indicated in his comments about quick decisions, and they were not forthcoming from either the Alberta Agricultural Development Corporation or the Alberta Opportunity Corporation. And in my remarks, that was the point that I was attempting to make. In saying, in following what the Minister quoted, I go on to say, many arms twisted to say, to get your job done because we need a response by a certain point in time. And that is the point that I'm making, Mr. Speaker, that I was encouraging, and that's my job as a member of this legislature and as a representative in a constituency, to encourage the public service to act as quickly as possible in serving my constituents. That is not interfering with the process of delivering policy or forcing a civil servant to do something outside of his terms of reference, because I have not done that. I would say, Mr. Speaker, that maybe the Minister did not have the background to this matter and have all of the Hansard placed before him. Maybe his researchers did not advise him correctly. I would think with his experience, and I certainly will accept it on that basis, with his experience in the House of Commons, experience in this legislature, that he would accurately quote someone from the Hansard. and accurately state what that person has said. I feel at this moment it's a point of privilege, and I do raise it as a point of order.
It's being regarded as a point of order, and it's somewhat irregular because it applied in a committee of supply rather than in the main House. Nevertheless, Minister of Agriculture, briefly in response.
Mr. Speaker, I'm more than happy to respond to the honourable member for Little Bow. I didn't refer to him by constituency or by name yesterday. I referred to the page in Hansard so that anybody who wished to gather the full implication of what I was saying would have the opportunity to read the entire page. And I'm more than happy if the honourable member will allow me the time to read the entire quotation, which he acknowledges would take some considerable time. What we want to do on this side is make sure that we're always accommodating. And in the event that the honourable member does have problems with the... I'm sorry? I'm unaware of what I should apologize for. If the honourable member would indicate where he feels he has been slighted, I'm more than happy to take it under consideration. But I want to leave the honourable member the assurance that what we want to do is make sure that our public service, or those individuals who do serve the public interest in the province of Alberta, always do act in a forthright manner. And that's our hope, that's our challenge, and I leave that commitment to the honourable member also. But I also indicated last night, which I will again underscore, whereby so often there are accusations from members in the New Democratic Party or the Liberal Party or the Representative Party that relate directly to some actions that we have taken. We all share collectively in those decisions, Mr. Speaker, because we are a legislative assembly developing policy statements and policy positions for the province of Alberta. If the honourable member feels that I've misrepresented him, I would hope that he would say so in a direct way and quote from what I said last night that did misrepresent him. But he indicated himself, and I'm more than happy to go on and conclude. I didn't figure I should take more time than what I did last night because I wanted to have the participation by all those who did wish to participate in the budgetary estimates debate.
Thank you, honourable members, for your representations. The chair will indeed refer to motion 608, which reads, procedural difficulties which arise in committees ought to be settled in the committee and not in the House, and therefore directs that this be decided by committee of the whole and the chair. When the committee returns to committee of supply and the chairman is in the chair, rather than take up the time of the House. Thank you. Orders of the day. Might we revert briefly to the introduction of guests? Opposed? Member for Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have the special privilege of introducing the parents of our newest page, Ms. Kara Stewart, who is from Stony Plain. Mike and Lorraine Stewart are seated in the members' gallery, and I ask that all members of this assembly offer them the warmest welcome. And would you please stand?
Mr. Speaker, Her Honour, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor will now attend upon the Assembly.
Please be seated.
May it please Your Honor, the Legislative Assembly has, at its present sitting, passed certain bills to which, and in the name of the Legislative Assembly, I respectfully request Your Honor's assent.
Your Honor, the following are the titles of the bills to which Your Honor's assent is prayed. Number 8, Natural Gas Rebates Amendment Act, 1988. Number 14, Appropriation Interim Supply Act, 1988. Number 15, Appropriation Alberta Heritage Savings Trust Fund, Capital Projects Division, Interim Supply Act, 1988-89. Number 16, Appropriation Alberta Capital Fund, Interim Supply Act, 1988. These are the bills to which Your Honor's assent is prayed. In Her Majesty's name, Her Honor, the Honourable the Lieutenant Governor, doth assent to these bills.
Order!